Hey Frank, could you check to see if it's going live on YouTube?
Yes, sir. Give me a sec. It's not live. It's just there. Like, you know how it'll be like a preview? It's like a preview, but it's not actually live. Hey, Converse, what's up, man? Yeah, so let me see. I'll go back on there and check if it's on live.
Okay, there are people in the chat who said it's live.
All right, great. So I guess I can start with my arguments.
Go.
So I think God exists. By God, I'm talking about a perfect being, unlimited in power, knowledge, and goodness, who created the universe. And so, okay, why do I think this? Well, I think it for the same reason I think lots of facts about history or chemistry and so on, where I think God's existence explains lots of things that we already know about. So the reason, for instance, that I believe in that Julius Caesar existed is because Julius Caesar's existence explains all the writing about him and so on and so forth. I think that the existence of God explains lots of facts about the world. So what facts does it explain? Well, it explains that there's a physical world at all. That's more strongly predicted if there's a God than if there's not a God, because if God wants to make physical, embodied, conscious agents on the grounds that they're a good thing, then he needs a physical world to make that. So it's at least not that unlikely that there'd be a physical world. In contrast, if there's no God, it's much less likely that there'd be a physical world. It explains why there are laws at all. It explains why the laws are applicable, right? So it explains why the laws that exist happen to apply to the things that exist. You could imagine that not happening, right? So you could imagine there are laws of the form, all Y's do something, but there are only X's. So the stuff just sits around dormant doing nothing forever. It requires that the laws are capable of producing complex structures, right? So you could just have laws where the things just move in a straight line or in a circle or don't do anything or, just follow some very boring path. But those aren't the laws we have. We have laws that give rise to these very, very rich, complex structures that are capable of forming them. We have finely tuned constants on top of that. So we have constants that if you tweak them even very slightly, that fall in this extremely narrow range that's necessary to give rise to complex structures. If they were different by even a very, very small amount out of the whole range of possible values they could take on, then no complex structures would form. So, all these things are very improbable if there is no God. But much more likely if there's a God who wants to create them, especially given just how narrow the range is, right? If there's no God, you could get any value of the cosmological constant. And so it's super unlikely that you'd happen to have it take on one of the astronomically small number of values where it gives rise to interesting and complex structures. Then on top of that, you have... I think God is the best explanation of why, even after you have that, you need more stuff in order to get conscious agents like us. First of all, you need for certain physical structures to give rise to consciousness, which is at least surprising on if there's no God. If there's a God, you'd expect at least, the physical structures to give rise to consciousness. And if there are physical structures like that, for those physical structures to arise, if there is a God, you wouldn't expect that. And then finally, they have to be capable of giving rise to this complex, rich consciousness that interacts with the physical world. And so as a result, I think the fact that all these things happen is strong evidence for the existence of God. These aren't the only reasons to believe in the existence of God. There happen to be quite a lot of other arguments I like, but that I think are successful, and maybe we can talk about some of those if we're seeing how God compares to other sort of similar to theist hypotheses. But I think at least these are enough to establish that the probability that God exists is a lot higher than it would otherwise be. And then I think that unless you start out with a super low prior in God existing, you should think God probably exists, but then you shouldn't start with a low prior because God is very simple. God, theism is just the idea that there's this fully unlimited mind, right? It's a very simple hypothesis, just one fundamental thing without limits. So yeah, for that reason, God exists.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Kick it over to TJump.
All right, so let's. The first thing you said is that the God hypothesis explains lots of things. That is not good evidence to believe anything, because any hypothesis can post hoc explain literally all of the data. It's the problem of underdetermination. So the ability to explain lots of things is not a good reason to believe anything. You can say magic farting leprechauns created the universe 5 seconds ago, and that would explain all facts that we see and believe. That would not make that a good reason to believe magic farting leprechauns exist. So what we're interested in is, when we look for evidence, is something that indicates your hypothesis more so than the leading competitive hypothesis. In this case, would be like naturalism or something. And so you brought up the fine-tuning argument, and you said that if God existed, we would expect to see certain kinds of fine-tuning that under naturalism we would find unexpected, something along those lines. That is false. So that assumes a particular type of theism and a general type of naturalism or atheism. So like if you assume a particular type of God who likes to create humans or whatever, then a universe with humans would be more expected under that particular type of God. Now, if you think of an alternative type of God, a God who only likes puppies or only likes black holes or only likes nothingness, then every possible type of universe has an equal probability as a universe with humans, and it's no more expected that you would find constants that would be designed for humans than it would be literal nothingness. And on the naturalist side, when you say it is unexpected on naturalism or atheism, you're taking the general kind of atheism where there are no predetermined or values that would have been selected for more so than other values. If we pick a particular kind of naturalism atheism, for example, like naturalistic pantheism or whatever, it has a particular set of constants that are within its nature, then whatever those constants would prioritize would be more likely than a different kind of atheism naturalism with a different set of particular constants that it prioritizes. And so when we compare a particular kind of atheism to a particular kind of theism, the probabilities are exactly the same, 1-to-1, because both models have a particular nature to prioritize a particular thing existing. If we compare general theism to general atheism, there is no increase in probability one way or the other. They both have exactly the same probabilities for selecting a universe with life as one without life. And so there's no reason to think that because we see a universe as we see it, regardless of what we would see, to prioritize one over the other.
Okay, so should we go into open discussion?
Sounds good.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so you say because any hypothesis can explain the data, explaining the data doesn't favor one hypothesis. Do you agree that some fact favors a hypothesis if the probability of the fact conditional on the hypothesis is higher than the probability on the fact conditional on the falsity of the hypothesis?
Depends. In some cases, yes. In some cases, no.
In what cases would that not be true?
So, for example, I can post hoc make up a hypothesis that would entail all of the facts I see, and they're like required. So like if any of these are all of these facts are required for the existence of my hypothesis. And then I can compare that to something that makes predictions, say evolution or whatever. Evolution doesn't require all of these things to exist. There's other ways it could be happen. So it's not really a conditional that everything we see must have happened this way for evolution to be true. It's just a coincidence. And evolution is still true. My hypothesis is false. Making it conditional is just irrelevant. We don't care. It doesn't matter if it's necessary or preconditioned.
Right. So in that case, I would say that the probability. So if your hypothesis is like, that there's like a genie who rigged all the evidence so that it appears that it corresponds with all the facts that are predicted on evolution, I agree that would explain the data. But I would just say that theory has just such a low prior probability, because that theory, the prior probability of that theory is the prior probability that there's a genie at all, and then multiplied by the probability that if there was a genie, they would do all those specific things. So it doesn't at all raise the overall probability.
So that would be a straw man. So in this case, that would be the nature of the genie.
How is it a straw man? I haven't even represented your position.
So in this case, it would be like the nature of the genie was necessary, so that would necessarily do all of the things we see And so this is the most likely outcome, is that all of the things we see are exactly what would have happened because it's the nature of the genie. So it's not just random. And it's like, oh,
Right.
the nature of this genie must necessarily, because it's the oneness of the genie. So it only has one part.
Yeah,
And
right.
its
So,
one partness is necessarily would create everything we see as we see it. And if we compare that to the hypothesis of evolution, that's still just a stupid hypothesis. I can post hoc rationalize anything to make it seem like there's just one magic property that would necessarily produce everything we see, and compare that to something like evolution. It's just garbage. It's not evidence at all. What we need is novel predictions. Evolution provides those. And so the novel predictions of evolution completely trounces any kinds of prior probability. And prior probability doesn't apply to anything new hypotheses, only applies to past hypotheses anyway.
okay. Well, so so what I was saying was that in that case, I think that the prior probability of that very specific hypothesis would be very low, but that hypothesis, it would actually go up in probability as a lot because of the evidence, but just because its prior is so low, it would still have a very, very low probability. But I don't agree with your idea that the only reason why we believe things is on the basis of making novel testable predictions. I mean, if we apply that consistently, we would throw out nearly all of the historical sciences, right? So the way we know that Julius Caesar existed in history is not that people made a novel testable prediction and then did a scientific experiment and concluded that he existed. It's that it explains facts, like the writing about him.
No, that is incorrect. So historical evidence, there is a paper on this by Mike Licona on historians and miracle claims, et cetera, something. And historical claims are only justifiable when they are of things that have made testable predictions. So Julius Caesar, human. Humans have testable predictions. Perfectly fine to make claims about him and believe them based off of testimony or writing. In the case of miracles, magic, mythical creatures, paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, those are disregarded in history and in law because they must be demonstrated to exist empirically via novel predictions before they are accepted. And so in the case of both the entire field of history and the entire field of law, novel predictions is the standard something must meet before it is an acceptable puzzle piece to use in a hypothesis. And then after you show that class, humans, whatever, then you can extrapolate to individuals like Julius Caesar via testimony. That part doesn't matter. But you can never use testimony or historical claims for anything that doesn't have an empirical basis, like miracles, magic, God.
Okay, so I'm very confident that you're misrepresenting what Licona said, given that Licona is a Christian who's written multiple books where he argues from the historical evidence to the resurrection of Jesus.
So this is
so he clearly thinks.
Stop. So this argument wasn't about what Licona said. Licona was presenting the opposite view. He was arguing against the consensus in the field. The consensus in the field is what I was representing. So I wasn't representing Licona. I was representing.
So Licona says it's the consensus in the field. Can you tell me where does
the
Licona
very
say
first sentence of the paper? I think it's like the most or the something historians in the field hold to it that the study of miracle claims lies outside the bound of historian acting in their professional capacity. Something. Here are the reasons why. It's like the very first sentence of the paper.
Okay, well, what he said is most biblical. Okay, so I just pulled up the paper. And maybe we are getting slightly sidetracked, but he says most biblical scholars and historians hold that investigation of a miracle report lies outside of the rights of historians acting within their professional capacity. Right, so he's not saying that it can't be reasonable to conclude it based on historical evidence. All that he's saying is that that's not in their role as historians.
Oh my God.
Just like if you conclude
if you
theism on the basis of fine-tuning evidence, just like if you conclude theism. Sorry, can I finish?
No.
Let me just finish my explanation, and then you can go on.
No. So
if you conclude,
theism, talking.
Sorry, I was not.
I don't care. So, as I have used this paper many, many times, if you continue reading the paper, the whole point Licona is expressing here is why. Why do they do this? That sentence does not express why. It just expresses the position. They do not accept this. Then he references big, long quotes from other people about the methodology of history, which if you read, will express the exact same thing I just said. If it doesn't have an empirical basis, you can't use it in history. That's the simple way to say it. So this is the conclusion. I don't care if you agree. If you don't, you can leave. You're wrong. Stop wasting my time. This is just the facts. And you can talk to historians. I've talked to many who have literally said this and agreed with me. It's not up for debate. Historians hold to it that the study of miracle claims, the first sentence, is correct by the consensus. Lacona agrees this is the consensus. And the reason is history and law do not accept testimony for things that don't have an empirical basis. This is an indisputable fact. If you don't agree, don't waste my time. This is just a fact of history and a fact of law. Now, once you get past that fact, then what's your argument?
Okay, well, so I don't agree with your reading of
Do
Lacona.
not care.
But-
Don't bring up that topic.
Okay.
Get past that. Say that's a fact. You don't get to disagree. Now, what's your argument?
Well, I would encourage people to read the paper, because I
Yes,
have looked at this paper
agreed.
before, and his point is that it's not true in their role as historians that they do that, but nonetheless, it can still, they think that it's just outside their purview of history, because history is
Okay, I'm not interested in your interpretation. Your interpretation is wrong. I do not care. I know Lacona is arguing for historical miracles. I don't care. This is the consensus in the field. Whether you agree or not, I don't care. What is your argument related to the debate topic?
Well, it'll be harder to hear if you keep muting me. But anyways,
That's why I do
so
it. Yes.
so yeah.
So what is your argument related to the debate topic?
So I think it can be reasonable to believe things on the basis of things explaining facts. Now, your response to that was that you said, well, we only believe it on the basis of it having some previous empirical basis, right? So the only reason why we think that it's reasonable to accept to accept certain particular historical claims is because we already have empirical basis for people, and then we use the things that are in the category of people to explain the data. Now, it's true that we have evidence for people, but we don't have empirical evidence for Julius Caesar. What we have is testimony that's more strongly predicted on the hypothesis that exists. Now, we have empirical evidence for a set of things containing Julius Caesar, but we also have that for God, right? So you can similarly say we have observed things, and then we've observed things. God is a thing, and so we already have an implicit empirical basis for God, and so then it makes sense to believe in God. I think it's just an arbitrarily constructed categories to rule out concluding that God exists on the basis of explaining facts about the world. And it's hard to see in probabilistic terms why it wouldn't be right. If the way that you update on evidence is just you look at the prior probability of the evidence, and then you look at how much more times more likely the facts of the world are if the evidence is true than if it's false, then that would be able to vindicate supernatural claims as long as there's enough evidence for them. And in this case, there is, because the probability of finely tuned constants is so astronomically low.
No, I already addressed the finely tuned constants. There's no difference in probabilities between that of a God hypothesis or naturalist hypothesis. But first, to address the prior probabilities,
address that.
Yes, we will. That is probably going to be the key point. But first thing, prior probabilities are garbage. They don't apply for the same reasons as historical testimony and law testimony. And it's not that God is a thing. It's that anything that has properties that lack any empirical basis, like magic, miracles, mythical creatures, supernatural powers, any of those things would require justification. Having one such property, like it exists, would be analogous. So you could say, a thing that exists was seen by testimony. 100% agree. But a thing that exists that has magic powers, because you have added a property that lacks an empirical basis, now you've left the realm of what can be justified via testimony. You can only use things that all of the properties that consisted of have an empirical basis. Existence is one of those for God, but the other ones are not. Outside of space-time, singularities, simplicity, all that garbage has not been demonstrated empirically, and so that would not be justifiable via testimony. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so I don't think that it's true. So what you were suggesting wasn't about testimony. What you were suggesting was that in order to believe in something that doesn't have an empirical basis, we need it needs to make novel testable predictions. And so I was disagreeing with that. Now you say, well, and I was giving the example of Julius Caesar. Now you disagreed and you say, well, we do have an empirical basis for Julius Caesar because we have empirical basis for humans. And saying, well, humans are a category that Julius Caesar's part of, but we don't have testable predictions made based on Julius Caesar in particular existing. All we have is empirical evidence based on the category of things existing, right? So similarly, in the case of God, we have empirical evidence for for things existing. God is a thing, and so even though we don't have novel testable predictions made from God existing, we have novel testable predictions from the category existing. Now, next, you suggested that what we need is empirical evidence for it having the property.
So
For
you
it
seem
having
to
that
be
property.
making the argument these are two
Well, we
separate
don't have any
arguments.
empirical
That's
evidence
not
for that in the case of Julius Caesar because we have no novel testable predictions made on the notion that something being has the property of being Julius Caesar. So I think it's perfectly analogous in both cases.
Okay, so there is no property of being Julius Caesar. That's not a thing. All the things that make up Julius Caesar, his cells, his matter, his energy, are all things that have been demonstrated to exist. There's no property of Julius Caesar that has ever been claimed to exist by anyone.
Wait, sorry, you don't think Julius Caesar has the property of being Julius Caesar?
No, there's no such property. There is a label that we use that we made up in words that we call a property, but there's no such property that actually exists independent of our imagination. No.
Okay. Well, then I can say the same thing about God. I can say, okay, God doesn't have the property of being God because there are properties are made up words and labels.
Does he have
so
the
that
property
God,
of
so that
being
it's not
outside
an
of space-time?
Yeah. Does Julius Caesar have the property of being the leader of Rome?
No, that's not a property. So again, that part is nothing.
Okay, so then God doesn't have the property of being outside of space-time if Julius Caesar doesn't have the property of being emperor of Rome. If you deny that there are properties, then of course God doesn't
I
have
don't
properties.
deny
Now,
that there are
I think there are
properties.
properties.
Properties are labels of things that exist. There are conceptual labels like I think someone's tall. That's not a property. That's not a property in reality. That's a subjective thing I've made up. Now, if you're claiming there's some ontological fact like being outside of space-time, that is something that is a fact of reality, not a fact of my mind. I'm not labeling it as such. It is a fact that this thing does not have any of the physical constants of space and time in it. That's essentially.
Okay, is it a fact of reality that Julius Caesar was the emperor of Rome?
Subjective social construct, not a part of what makes him. No, I don't care about that.
Okay, it's not a fact of reality. So why is it a fact of reality? I don't care about
any of the social construct facts. I care about his ontology of what makes him exist. All of his existence facts. He is made of only natural things that have already been demonstrated to exist. I don't care about his social relations. I don't care about his conceptual leanings. I don't care about how tall he is. These don't apply to God. This is clearly not even close to analogous to the silly Garbo stuff that is claimed of God outside of space-time, singularity, simplicity, infinitely powerful. All of this garbage is stuff that has some kind of ontological essence. It is an existing thing that can do stuff. It's not a label we made up. And this stuff has no empirical basis. Therefore, this stuff is stupid to believe based off of priors or testimony. And the reason I brought up testimony was history. History for Julius Caesar, that's testimony. That was the point there. So it is not analogous to say it is, I believe Julius Caesar exists and was emperor of Rome, to believe, I believe there's a super all-powerful sky daddy outside of space-time who can create everything. Not analogous. Can you guys still hear me? Oh, you're roboting. All right, let's refresh. There we go. Is it better now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Hey.
I got a thing on the bottom. It said like RTS is connecting or something. I don't.
Yeah. So in both cases observed is so in both cases there's a broad category of things that we have empirical evidence for. We have any empirical evidence in the sense of no testable predictions for specific instances of the thing, right? So we don't have empirical evidence on the basis of but the difference it has properties. So but properties aren't real.
You're cutting in and out. I can't.
So I'm just saying properties aren't real, and then the way things are. Then I would just say the same thing about God. That if God doesn't have property, and so it's not.
Hey Frank, is he cutting in and out for you? Because I can only hear like
thing
every
that
other
we're
word.
of evidence. So whatever you say about the Caesar
Converse.
case will apply to the God case.
Yeah, Tom, you've been the one cutting out a lot.
Okay, yeah,
buddy.
I think I have
I'm
like
not
a
sure if you
bad
can
connection.
fix your Wi-Fi.
All right. Is it a little bit better now? Testing. Is it better now?
Yeah, you're coming through clear.
It's better now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
All right. So, in the case of Julius Caesar, all the properties that make up the essence of Julius Caesar are things that have been demonstrated to exist empirically: cells, matter, skin, humans, bones, lungs, hearts, all things that we can demonstrate exist. This is not true for the case of God. All the things that make up God have not ever been demonstrated to exist. There are some analogous things like consciousness, existence, those things. Outside of space and time, nope. All powerful, nope. Can create universes, nope.
Yeah.
So there's
So
no.
I don't think.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I don't know if those are part of the essence of God. But so it's not true that all the things that are part of the essence of Julius Caesar we've had evidence for, right? Because so the essence of something is what's needed to be that thing, right? The essence of
Nope.
being
I'm
me
just
is
talking
what's
about
needed
physically,
for something
just
to
as
be
physical
me.
properties from a naturalist perspective. I don't care about the essence, existence, not as garbage. This is very, very natural.
You were the one who invoked mysterious essence talk.
Yes,
so if you're not
your
talking,
word of
so
essence,
you're saying
your
all
usage is not all usages. I'm using the word in the naturalistic sense. The essence physically of Julius Caesar
okay.
is
So
just
can you
cells.
explain what you mean by essence?
Just in physically, just literally what I just said. Physically, naturally,
can you explain what you mean by
Julius
essence?
Caesar. I literally was just answering that question. Don't interrupt. Physically, essence is the things that physically make up the individual, that require that individual to exist, is just matter, energy, DNA, skin, bones, lungs, heart. Just the physical parts of a human. Nothing else. There are no properties outside of things that have already been demonstrated to exist via empirical predictions entailed in Julius Caesar. Not a single one. Indisputable.
Okay, so the idea is that your claim is that it's unreasonable to believe on something on the basis of except on the basis of novel testable predictions, unless we have novel testable predictions from the things that compose it, right? So from the things that you combine together to get the thing.
Sure, that is a good summary. If all of the parts of the things have been demonstrated to exist via novel prediction, then it is in the realm of not stupid to believe based off of testimony or conceptual evidence like testimony.
Okay, and why should we accept this principle?
Because of the consensus of history and the consensus of law and the consensus of every academic field that uses the basis of testimony as a basis of evidence, uses the standard as a way to eliminate garbage evidence, such as things that human minds make up that have no basis in reality. So, or maybe
Okay.
a better
So
way
your
to phrase
claim is
that
that
would
we
be
shouldn't think that.
a better way to phrase that would be is humans might make up a lot of shit, and every academic field that uses human testimony as evidence has realized that the best way to filter out the garbage that human minds make up is to make a limit that it's not allowed to justify things that haven't been empirically demonstrated to exist. So miracles, magic, mythical creatures, paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, they're all out.
Okay, so okay. I mean, well, there are several ways we could go here. So one thing is, I mean, so I don't. It may be that historians. So I disagree with your claim about what the historical consensus is, but most historians. I don't think that most historians should thinking something tells us very much about a philosophical question in philosophy of science, right? So the fact that most historians don't invoke leprechauns to explain historical phenomena doesn't tell us anything about whether God is the best explanation of fine tuning. And in particular, I agree that historians shouldn't be constantly invoking leprechauns to explain phenomenon, because I think whether miracles ever suffice is largely a philosophical question. It's outside their purview as historians, and that as we've observed from the world, there isn't some deity popping around constantly doing miracles, and so your prior probability in some particular miracle should be low. Right, but if we're using it to explain the universe, that's different from the sort of anthropomorphic deity that's popping around randomly doing miracles. And the other question: so on what grounds do you think anything existed, say prior more than 5 billion years ago?
I don't understand the question. Because it made novel predictions?
So we've now made novel predictions on the grounds that things more than 5 billion years ago existed. So
Yes.
so if all the people who were experimenting, they just had the belief that basically the world popped into being 5 billion years ago, kind of fully formed, in a state where it looked at the time about 8 billion years ago old, but really it was just a minute old at the first moment. If they had done that, then you think it would be reasonable to think that the universe is only 5 billion years old?
I don't understand the question.
So suppose that. So you say that the reason it makes sense to believe that the universe is more than 5 billion years old is that people have made novel testable predictions on that assumption. So imagine that while the people were doing the experiments, they were doing it on the assumption that really the universe is only 5 billion years old, but it looks older, right? So it was made 5 billion years ago, looking about 8 billion years old. Or 8.8 to be more exact. If they'd done that, then you think it would be reasonable to believe that the universe is only 5 billion years old and was created looking 8.8 billion years old?
Possibly. So like if all humans had an alternative hypothesis that was able to make all of the predictions that led us through the scientific progress, would it be rational to believe that alternative hypothesis? Yes.
Right. So even if there was, okay, suppose that Einstein, when he formulated his theory of general relativity, he said that the theory of general relativity is true on account of the square circle in my pocket that's turquoise and colorless. If that had been his theory, would it be reasonable to think that there was a colorless turquoise square circle in his pocket that explains this?
If it made novel testable predictions that were consistent and successful, then yes.
Okay, so if just that had been Einstein's theory, and then it made all the right predictions, then you would believe that there is that Einstein used to have a turquoise colorless square circle in his pocket.
Yeah, any hypothesis that is successfully
that's
able
absurd.
to make successful predictions is rational to believe. Yes.
And why do you think that?
Because if it's able to predict the future, that's what pretty much no other hypothesis ever can do successfully. And so if anything can do that, you're rational to believe it. So like, let's say a magic sky daddy wrote a book and the book makes predictions about the future, like, I don't know, stuff raining from the sky or magic dragons or chips in our arms. If all of this stuff actually happened as it said it in the book, the people who read the book would be justified in believing there was a magic sky daddy. That would be a rational conclusion. It is logically justifiable to believe that. Yes. Could it be wrong? Yes, it could be wrong. Are they justified in believing that? Does that increase the probability that the proposition that the God exists is true? Yes, that is a rational thing to do. If you have a magic 8 ball that you shake and it just tells you the lottery numbers every single time, and is it rational to believe that it's a magic 8 ball, like a literally magic 8 ball? Yes, that is an actual thing. Could it just be random chance? 100%. Would you be logically justified in concluding that it was magic? Yes, because it can predict the future accurately, which is extremely hard. Making up high prior probabilities is extremely easy. It's just called making shit up. You can do that real easy. It is not easy to predict the future. It is extremely difficult. So any hypothesis, no matter how silly, like our square circle, something that's a logical contradiction that can predict the future, is better than all hypotheses that have any prior probability of any numbers ever for any reason. Because
so I certainly agree that predicting the future is an advantage of a theory, right? Because that means that it's consistent with the data, and if you predict the future, like it's easy to ad hoc think things, explain things after the fact, but be wrong about them. But so I agree that's generally a virtue of a theory. But I don't think that automatically makes it worth accepting. If there are two theories that make identical predictions, it doesn't matter what was going on in the heads of the scientists as they were doing those experiments. And you haven't given an argument to think that it does matter. You've just asserted it. It's true. The fact that most false theories don't make novel testable predictions doesn't tell that if a theory makes novel testable predictions, it's probably the true theory or that it's reasonable to believe. So I have no idea why anyone would believe that, and it seems just obviously false. Like, I mean, it just seems clear that even if Einstein believed that general relativity was true because of the purple colorless square circle in his pocket, If that had happened, it still wouldn't be reasonable to believe that that there was a colorless square circle in his pocket. Now, if you have an argument for that, I'd be curious to hear the argument.
Well, I literally just gave it, so this is really trivial and pretty well
Can you
established. So what?
I didn't get the argument. Maybe it would be helpful if you put it into like premises or
If
something.
we had a book
conclusion.
fall from the sky, let's say it's called, like, I don't know, the Bible, and the Bible said DNA is a double helix. The world was created 13.8 billion years ago. This will happen in this year. Donald Trump will be president, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of facts. Would you be rationally justified in believing in God?
Yeah. I think you're rationally justified even if you don't have that. But I agree, that would raise the probability of God existing.
Right. So
how does that entail?
Let's switch it from God to round square in your pocket. Would you be rationally justified in believing there's a round square in your pocket that did all these things?
No.
That's massive hypocrisy, but okay.
Sorry, how is it massively hypocritical? I think whether it's reasonable to believe something in part depends on the prior probability. So the hypothesis that, for instance, either God's providing genuine revelation and pretending to be a square circle to troll is likely, or is likelier, or the probability that maybe God. There's a demon deceiving you. All those are way more likely than there being a colorless square circle providing revelation. So I agree, making testable predictions raises the probability of a hypothesis, but it doesn't automatically make it rational to believe. And you haven't given any, well, you've just asserted cases as if they're obvious, which it seems not at all obvious. And even if it is obvious, like in those cases, that doesn't imply that making novel testable prediction automatically makes a theory reasonable to believe. And I think we have plenty of good reason to think it doesn't make a theory reasonable to believe. The other question is, so if your view is that the way that we come to acquire knowledge is by correctly making novel testable predictions, how do you know that we've ever in the past made novel testable predictions rather than just hallucinating? I can answer that, which is I think that the hallucination hypothesis has a low prior. It requires greater complexity. It's worse on anthropic grounds. It fits with our experience poorly in all sorts of ways. But if you think that prior probabilities are made up bullshit, then it's very unclear how we are confident that in the past, when I have a memory of making a novel testable prediction, let's say based on a hypothesis, but how do I know that really happened?
Because I can make novel predictions right now based off of it. So yeah, I can make a novel prediction that if my hypothesis is correct, I can do a Google search and find out that, I don't know, there's facts that support that the world is 4.8 billion years old. Say I'm a kid and I don't know this. I can do a Google search, which I've never done before, and find out, oh, look, there are the facts. I was right. My hypothesis was correct. So we make novel predictions all the time from every single
Okay, but
person.
So pre-Googling, so at this moment, you haven't just made any novel testable predictions based on the fact that and after you Google it. Oh, you think you made a novel testable prediction? Well, how do you know that you actually did the Googling?
I do make more novel predictions. Very simple. Like, none of that is hard. None of that is even.
No, and then after
difficult.
you make those novel predictions, you won't know in that case that you did the Googling. Right? The more novel what happens is you make a novel prediction and then you do a thing and observe that the prediction came true. But then the question is, but how do you know you actually made the prediction?
I just did it.
But how do you know that you just did it rather than the universe having been created once again?
That's good. So it's like, let's say you impart false memories in my brain of me making novel predictions. I would be justified in believing whatever the hypothesis was that made those predictions. So let's say alien goes in my brain and says, I'm going to give you lots of false memories of making tons of predictions based off of the colorless round square. I'd be justified in believing the colorless round square. There's nothing of consequence to your question.
Okay. So if an alien, wait, okay, first of all, I don't see a justification for that. And second of all, that seems extremely silly. So if an alien, tweaks your brain, and the alien is tweaking with your brain to make it so that you think that you made a novel testable prediction based on the hypothesis that there's a round square in your pocket, you think that it's subsequently reasonable for you to believe that there's a round square in your pocket? Yes,
you can have false beliefs and it be justified. There can be justified false beliefs. This is a thing. This is uncontroversial in JTB. Like it seems like you just don't know basic philosophy. So like the American Indians, when Columbus went to America, he said that in 2 weeks, the sun will be blocked by my God because you've angered me because you didn't give me food.
Yeah. Look, I agree.
Were they justified in believing that Columbus's God did that?
Yes, I agree that you can have
solved.
justified. Yes, I agree that you can have justified false beliefs. My claim is that if you know that aliens were messing with your brain,
I didn't say I know
right?
that alien, so it's a straw man. It's irrelevant to the hypothesis. It's irrelevant to
Okay, so you
anything
don't.
I said. My analogy was exactly the same as the American Indian.
Okay, so you don't know that the aliens were messing with your brain.
Because it's literally the same as the American Indian example. You can just go with that because that proves the point, which you just agreed to.
Okay. Well, I think there's a difference between believing in a round square, which you should think almost certainly isn't true. But so can you explain to me why is it that if you have the memory of making a novel testable prediction on hypothesis X, that you ought to believe that hypothesis X is true? I get why if you know that you actually did make the novel testable prediction, and of course I don't accept that, but why that would make it more reasonable. But if you merely have the memory, unless you have some reason to think your memory is veridical, why in the world does that make it reasonable for you to believe hypothesis X?
What a stupid question. Like literally what a just insanely stupid question. If the best basis of evidence you have, your memories, concludes that you have a reason to believe some hypothesis based off of the best methodology you have, are you rational to justify? Yes, you moron. Literally, you're asking moronic questions that have literally nothing to
Okay.
do with the questions. These are meta questions that are just irrelevant.
Well, they're not meta questions because you are appealing to your epistemology to say that there isn't evidence for God, and I'm saying that I don't think your epistemology is very plausible. Right, but so
But
you've just
done nothing
asserted
to
that.
demonstrate. So let's go back to just the very basics. If we have a I don't know, prior probabilities or testimony or a conceptual claim that they have magic, miracles, mythical creatures, unicorns, my epistemology says that's garbage. Give me empirical evidence with novel predictions, or you're done. That methodology is accepted by every scientific field. Yours is just garbage. Now,
Yeah,
I don't care about the
sorry.
linguistic games you want to play. It doesn't matter. I've won that. It's over. You're done. You don't get to like say, oh, but my prior probabilities. I don't care. Novel predictions are a better justifier for belief than your prior probability garbage. Now, I don't care if you want to bring in brain in the vat matrix solipsism garbage. That applies to both hypotheses. It's just irrelevant. The evidence I provided in the context of the debate, testimony, including or conceptual evidence in this case, which would include prior probabilities, testimony, or anything that people imagine, is not justifiable to believe in things that don't have an empirical basis like mythical sky daddies and magic. Now, that's a very clear, very concise argument that makes a lot of sense. And your counter argument
Yeah.
was
Sorry,
solipsism, which I don't care about. Okay, that's garbage. And prior probabilities. So
No. What you're suggesting that it's not reasonable to believe on some hypothesis unless it makes novel testable predictions or we have an empirical basis
sure.
for it. Now, I was saying that I think if that's right, then we wouldn't believe in Julius Caesar. We went down that route. I don't think you give a remotely persuasive response to that. And I think that
so Julius Caesar is made of all of the parts of Julius Caesar are empirical things. So he has an empirical basis. So I don't understand how that you don't understand that is a complete fully response.
So it's true that atoms have an empirical basis.
Yeah.
But atoms composing Julius Caesar, we haven't made any novel testable predictions.
I don't care.
Based on that.
That's good enough. If you want to say God is made of atoms, I'd say God is justifiable too. Is God made of atoms?
I don't think God's made of atoms.
God is not made of atoms. So how is this in any way remotely relevant to the conversation? Because the only requirement I've set forth is that you need to be composed of things that have an empirical basis, and then that's good enough. Now, there's obviously going to be more criteria beyond that, because I could say there's aliens or something that was composed that came down in history or whatever. I don't care, but that would still be better than Magic Sky Daddy God, who is not composed of things that have been that have an empirical basis. So the criteria I set is just like the minimum level of criteria to be rational to believe based off of conceptual evidence, like priors. Well,
so I don't see a reason to accept that we need to have the empirical basis for the things that compose the thing, right? So, for example, with dark matter. Now, it's true that dark matter did make some novel testable predictions, but I think even if it hadn't, just because it explains so well the facts about the universe, like the behavior, the strange way that gravity behaves, the different rotation of planets, even if we hadn't made those predictions in advance, but had discovered them and then later formulated the dark matter hypothesis, I think most scientists would join me in this, that dark matter would be reasonable to believe in, because even though we, by definition, don't know what dark matter is made of, we would still be confident that it exists by observing its effects.
Well, so if you were just saying there is a thing that we know nothing about that is causing the creation of the universe or something, I'm okay with that. But you're applying properties into it. You're saying, but unlike unanalogous to the dark matter example, which we literally don't claim to know what it is at all. We're just saying there is this thing we don't know about, which causes this observable phenomenon. Now,
Right. Okay. But you were suggesting that it's unreasonable to believe in something if we don't understand, if we don't have empirical evidence for the
Right,
things
right.
that compose it.
so if
And
you're
so
saying
I was
this,
disagreeing with that in giving the dark matter example.
well, your
Now, it
disagreement
may
doesn't
be,
work.
now,
Your disagreement doesn't work. So if we said magic pixies cause dark matter, that would be stupid, right? You would agree that's stupid.
right, but I think that would be stupid because there isn't evidence that favors the magic pixie
I don't care why you
hypothesis
think
over-
it's stupid. You have a terrible
over-
epistemology. The point here is that if you apply properties to the cause of dark matter, that's unjustified. Now, you're just saying there is something we don't know about causing this. 100% agree, rational, reasonable. That's all dark matter is. Dark matter is the claim there is something causing this phenomenon. That's it. If that's the only claim you were making about God, I would say that's reasonable, but you're not. You're making additional claims. You're making the magic farting pixie claims causing dark matter because you're adding property. You're saying he's outside of space-time. He's perfect oneness, simplicity, he's
Well, I
infinite
haven't-
power. All of this garbage you've added into the hypothesis, which makes it not analogous to dark matter. In the case of
Do
dark
you
matter,
think-
I
do
think
you
it's
think that-
perfectly reasonable to say, I don't know what's causing that, but something is causing that. 100%.
Right. But so you're pointing to differences between dark matter and God. And I agree, there are lots of differences between dark matter and God. I'm obviously much more confident that dark matter exists than that God exists. But what you were saying earlier was that it's only reasonable to believe in something if
Yes.
the thing makes novel testable predictions or is composed of things that make novel
Yes,
testable
that
predictions.
is correct. So
So-
wait.
so-
That's what I was addressing here. So I was saying that in the case of dark matter, if you add something new, like if you said, I believe in dark matter and it's made of something that doesn't have an empirical prediction, that would be stupid. Nobody does that. When people say they believe in dark matter, they're just saying, I don't know what's causing that, but something is
Okay, so
causing
which
that.
so which premise do you object to? It's reasonable to believe that dark matter exists. Do you agree with
No.
that?
Yes, agree.
Yes. Okay. Yes, you agree with that. Just to be clear,
Yes,
right?
agree. Yes.
Okay. And dark matter is not composed of things that have an implicit empirical basis.
That part I disagree with. Nobody has said that.
So you think that dark matter is composed of something that has an implicit empirical
Nobody
basis?
has said that either. We don't have a statement. Dark matter is just an unknown. It's like we don't know what this is. That's all it is. It's a we don't know. There's
But then,
no properties.
okay, but if you say, okay, then I can say the same thing about God.
Yes, I'm
God
fine
has an
with that.
unknown.
That
God
is
has an
okay.
unknown basis. Okay, so if I say God has an unknown essence, right? So we know that God made the world. Then you're fine with the argument for God. You don't think your epistemology rules it out?
Right. So if all you're claiming is that stuff exists and something which I'm going to label God, which has all unknown properties.
Why
Was-
doesn't dark matter doesn't have all unknown
Yeah, it does.
properties.
Literally all of them are unknown. Literally all of them.
No, for instance, we know that it exerts a gravitational field.
No.
Then what do you think the predictions based on dark matter were based
So
off?
a
If
lot
not,
of the predictions of dark matter say that it's just that nothing changes about the current physics. There's just news. There's nothing new there. It's just a glitch in the calculations. We have to modify the calculations. So if you modify general relativity, problem solved. So there isn't actually any dark matter. There's no additional thing there. So dark matter doesn't have any properties to it. There's a phenomenon. We're trying to explain the phenomenon, but there's no entailed properties to it whatsoever. Many of the hypotheses that explain dark matter don't entail adding any.
well, those other hypotheses are not actually dark matter hypotheses.
Yes,
Those
they
other
are.
hypotheses. Sorry, what?
Yes, they are. Dark matter isn't a label for a thing. Dark matter is there's a phenomenon. We don't know what's
Okay.
causing it. There's no actual
No,
essence to dark
wait,
matter.
okay. So one theory is called the Mond theory, and the
Yes.
Mond theory is the idea that if we modify the theory of gravity, that'll explain the anomalies that people use to invoke dark matter. Your view, you think that that's just a version of dark matter rather than an alternative to dark matter?
Essentially.
Okay, so if we Google Mond theory, dark matter, will we find that they're the same thing? Or that so for instance, if you just Google Mond theory dark matter, the first thing that pops up is a Science Direct article, the first line of which is, in Mond, there is no notion of dark
How does
matter.
this relate to the topic?
Well, you were suggesting that the only thing that it's reasonable to believe in are that when we say that
Yes. So
when
there are no entailed properties of dark matter. It does not require any properties.
okay,
It's
so
just
you
an
don't think that dark
unknown for
matter
a phenomenon. If Mond is correct, that fully explains the dark matter hypothesis. That is, dark matter is just
so,
this unknown glitch in the thing. That would be dark matter.
so you think that the dark matter is just that Mond is just a version of the dark matter hypothesis.
Every physicist is going to agree with me on this. If Mond
Sorry, every
stop
physicist,
talking,
find me
stop
one.
talking,
Find
stop
me
talking.
one.
If Mond is the correct explanation of dark matter, then yes, Mond is dark matter. That is it. Problem solved. You're done. Now, bring this back to your silly God hypothesis. There are no required properties to dark matter. None. It is rational to believe that there is something causing this. And it's rational to believe it's caused by properties that we know about. Things like WIMPs or whatever, because those have an empirical basis. They're made of things that all have an empirical basis. It is not rational to believe dark matter is made of magic farting pixies or an invisible sky daddy that's outside of space-time. So to actually bring this to the argument, how does your sky daddy who is outside of space-time in any way analogous to believing dark matter, which all of the hypotheses are only combinations of things that have an empirical basis and are just unknowns? They all fit. Every single model of dark matter fits into the two categories I gave: combinations of empirical stuff, and that nothing that has new properties that have not been empirically demonstrated. None of them. Not a single one.
Yeah. Well, so everything you just said is false. You suggested that any theory that's used to explain the things dark matter explains is a dark matter theory. That is not true. And if you Google,
Okay, stop wasting my time, you dumbass. The point of the argument, Steelman the argument, you dumbass. The point of the argument here is that the only rational conclusion is to believe things that have an empirical basis and don't add any things that have no empirical basis. Literally all of physics can only do that. You're literally not allowed to do that, to add garbage like magic fairies or God or prime movers in physics. You can't, because physics is just derivative equations. So all of physics follows this argument. You're using the physics argument. Guess what? It follows my model. Bring this back to your silly God and show how any of the explanations for dark matter are analogous to making up silly properties of your silly sky daddy.
okay, so
And if you waste my time on trying to debate the definitions of Mond, I'm just going to mute you. Go back to your argument. So my argument is,
you often mute people
yes,
when you get
when
you're sort of refuted on a point.
Nope, I mute people when they're wasting my time, when they're straw manning, and when they're not addressing the actual argument, the steel manning the position. The argument is, it is not rational to believe anything that doesn't have an empirical basis or is a combination of things that have an empirical basis. Every version of dark matter fits both of those definitions. So your analogy has been debunked.
Okay, so in both the case of dark matter,
Don't bring up
and
just how does this relate to your sky daddy?
Well, I was about to explain.
Okay,
In both the case of dark matter and the case of God, there's something that we believe in, and we believe in it because we say it has particular properties, and it explains facts about the world, even though we have not made even in cases where we haven't made novel testable predictions on the hypothesis that it is true. So in the case of God, we use God to explain fine-tuning, we use God to explain nomological harmony, psychophysical harmony, the existence of laws, the existence of a physical universe. It's the simple hypothesis that nicely explains all these things. In the case of dark matter, what we posit is that there is invisible matter that we cannot see that populates galaxies and that has new properties that we don't know about, that does not reflect light, but that nonetheless has a gravitational field like normal matter. And then that makes that explains huge numbers of otherwise surprising facts about, for example, the rotation of galaxies, the way that celestial bodies interact, the way that galaxies interact when they interact with each other. Now, so in both cases, it's a theory, and it explains some fact about the world. Now, you were suggesting, well, but when we say dark matter, we don't know anything about the world. Now, I don't really care how you want to use the term dark matter. Right. My point is that we have good justification for believing that there's some kind of invisible matter that exerts a gravitational field. That is widely accepted among physicists, if you want to talk about the consensus among physicists. There are alternative theories that are fairly widely rejected. Now, obviously, I'm not a physicist. I don't know if it's correct, but I think it's at least reasonable to believe things on the basis of consensus among physicists. And so my claim is that the reason why it's reasonable to believe that God exists is similar to the reason why it's reasonable to believe that dark matter exists. In both cases, we posit something with certain properties, and then that explains facts about our world that are otherwise improbable.
Okay, and how do you relate this to your God? Because everything in dark matter has a combination of empirically demonstrated stuff. There is baryonic dark matter. It just doesn't, like brown dwarfs. Not an issue. So
Wait,
nothing.
can you explain what you mean by baryonic dark matter?
Normal matter stuff that we know about that has an empirical basis. Like
Wait, okay. So baryonic.
baryons.
Okay, so baryonic dark matter. If I just Google it, so it's a version according to which baryons can compose dark matter. But the difference between dark matter and normal matter is that normal matter emits light, so we can see it, and baryonic dark matter doesn't, right? So the idea is not that it's
It
the
looks like
same
there are
thing
both
as
baryonic and non-baryonic types of dark matter. Some dark matter may be composed of regular matter, i.e. baryonic, but simply not give off much light. NASA, imaginetheuniverse.gov. So you're wrong. Stop wasting my time. This is not controversial in physics whatsoever. Nobody in physics is positing anything that doesn't have an empirical basis.
What thing are you saying is not controversial in physics?
That you are not allowed to posit things that don't have an empirical basis. So my argument, remember the whole thing that you're only rational to believe things that have an empirical basis. Every single property in physics is one of those things. It's a combination of those things. There's the demonstrated ones and the hypothetical ones, which are all combinations of things that have been empirically demonstrated.
Right. So I was giving a counterexample to that, which is dark matter. Now you're getting very frustrated about that.
Because I've been trying to explain it. It's not. Nothing in physics is a counterexample to that. All of the dark matter is combinations of physical stuff that has been demonstrated to exist. All of it.
Right. So you're repeating that, right? But so the dark matter theory.
I'm tired of this. I'm gonna mute you every time you bring it up. This part's debunked. Move on. Everything in physics. Nobody is allowed to posit magic, miracles, mythical creatures, supernatural sky daddies. Your analogy fails. Move on.
Well, so how in the world do you expect this to be a reasonable debate?
Because I don't care if it's a reasonable debate. I want to engage.
If you say,
I don't care if it's a reasonable debate. My time is worth more than to give you an equal chance. I don't care. I want an interesting argument, and you're not giving me one. So don't waste my time on it. Move on.
If you say that nothing in physics has some property,
nothing in physics is any combination of things. It's literally just a fact of physics. Move on, or I'm going to kick you.
Well, I mean, let's see. Do I value not being kicked more than I value making the point? Well, I mean, look, if you say that there are no counterexamples and then mute me every time I give the counterexample, then that's unreasonable, and then you won't hear the counterexample.
I've addressed the point. I've won the point. Move on. Try to address the topic of why you think fine-tuning isn't as expected under naturalism as theism.
Well, your epistemology that rules out there being a God is correct. Now, it turns out your epistemology.
Wait. Go back to how do you show that the laws of physics are more likely under a God hypothesis than under an atheist hypothesis?
Okay, so if there's a perfect being that wants to create conscious agents, it explains why all the stars would align so that you get conscious agents, which includes predicting that there would be laws, physical stuff, the laws would apply to the physical stuff, they would produce complicated structures, you'd get finely tuned constant, physical arrangements would give rise to consciousness, those physical arrangements would arise, and there would be harmonious psychophysical states that correlate with the physical.
Okay, so my argument was that is a particular version of theism. You have selected one of infinitely many possible ways theism could be. It has a particular nature to prioritize a particular outcome. You could do the same thing under naturalism and say, I make up a particular version of naturalism that has a nature such that it would, like a law or something in its nature, that would force it to create the universe as we see it. And I can do this for any particular way the universe could be, both under the God hypothesis and under the naturalism hypothesis, and give it any particular nature I want to give any kind of universe outcome I want. And so the probabilities comparing a particular kind of theism to a particular kind of atheism are the same, and the probabilities comparing a general kind of theism and a general kind of atheism are the same. So there's no
so I don't think that's right, because I whether that's right will depend on what the probability is, conditional on there being a designer of some sort, that there would be a designer who's disposed to create conscious agents. My claim is that the probability of that is pretty high for two reasons. First, the simplest kind of God is a God without limits, so an unlimited mind who knows everything and is unlimited in power. And then if there's a mind that's unlimited in knowledge and power, it would know all the moral facts, and then it would be disposed to follow the moral facts because recognizing that something is desirable, as Robin Collins suggested in your debate with him, knowing that something is desirable gives you a disposition to pursue it, absent a contrary inclination. Second of all, I think that it makes sense. There's something desirable about minds, right? There's something desirable about bringing about agents. And so as long as the probability of an agent wanting to make other good stuff is not terribly low, which it's not, a lot of agents seem to want to create good stuff, and the good is by its nature desirable, so it's at least not super unlikely that an agent would make it. If that's right, then the probability that there would be that if there's an agent, it would want to make a finely tuned universe isn't super low, while the probability, because a naturalistic, an atheistic universe is consistent with all the different laws, the probability that you get the finely tuned one is absurdly low.
All right, go back to the first one. You said the simplest definition of a mind is one that's unlimited. That seems stupid.
I said the simplest kind of mind is one that's unlimited.
That seems stupid. That seems like the simplest kind of, I don't know, factory is one that has infinite parts. That seems incredibly stupid.
Well, it's not about having infinite parts. The idea is that if there exists some fundamental property like a mind, the simplest version of that will be something that has the fundamental property in an unlimited way, right? So, for instance, if you're considering the hypothesis that the modal realist hypothesis that every possible world exists is way more likely than the hypothesis that there are exactly 98,000 possible worlds, just a random haphazard array of them, because it's simpler to just say they all exist, or that the modal facts are fully instantiated without limit, than it is to say that there is some limit. So it's very easy to specify. In contrast, other minds, you have to build in very specific ways the particular set of desires, the particular set of powers, and so on that it has.
All right, so go back and try to explain this of how, let's say, there's a quantum field. You're familiar with Boltzmann brains?
Yes.
So Boltzmann brain is just a brain that essentially pops into existence from a quantum field or something of any kind. And so let's say, what would be more likely, a Boltzmann brain that pops into existence that's unlimited, or a Boltzmann brain that's of a fly?
Oh, a Boltzmann brain of a fly would be more likely, but that's because if a Boltzmann brain arises from a particular physical process, and so it's simpler to say that there are fewer parts that come together rather than more parts. So I agree that if you thought that God was composed of lots of different parts, then a theory on which, there's a simpler God composed of fewer parts would be likelier than one where he was composed of parts. But the God hypothesis is that there's a God who doesn't have any parts, who's just this mind fully without limits, undivided, uncomposed, undifferentiated, pure, just unlimited mind. Now, I agree that'll be a problem if you're a physicalist. But first of all you need to get it to have a high prior is that.
Wait. So there's a follow-up question there. So, why would it be in the case of saying,
Sorry, you cut out. I just didn't hear the last sentence.
Yeah. So why would it be the case in, say, the fundamental nature of reality that we would prefer a mind as you define it that is unlimited, which seems like an oxymoron, but over one that's like a fly? Why would that be more probable?
The reason is that it's simpler to specify, because all you need to get that is you invoke one fundamental property without limits. So an unlimited mind, very simple to specify, and you only invoke fundamental properties. In contrast, to get a fly mind, you have to build it out of the physical world. You have to build the set of psychophysical laws. You have to come up with a complicated description of all its physical parts, of all its mental attributes. And so it's much more complicated to specify than to just say, look, there's an unlimited mind. It's for the same reason that the hypothesis that every possible world exists is better than the hypothesis that there's just a random selection of 58,000 possible worlds.
Right. So that seems just patently false. So it seems like if we're going to, I guess prioritize a hypothesis, we should prioritize one that has the least excess abilities. It can do the least. It can only do exactly what we need it to do and nothing more. So we should prioritize, say, a quantum particle that created only what we see and nothing else. That would be more rational than to say there is a quantum particle that created infinitely many multiverses. That seems less rational. That seems like you're adding a bunch of garbage that you don't need to explain the hypothesis. That seems like a bad one. So now, if I just say there's one property in this particle, or if there's 100 properties in this particle, it makes no difference. Zero difference to the. Don't care. I don't care how many parts, how many properties it has. I don't care how many. It's the abilities of what it can do. If you say it has infinite such power or unlimited power, that's stupid complicated. That is literally the most complicated any theory could ever possibly be, and is by definition has the lowest prior probability that you could possibly have. A better hypothesis would just be a particle that created exactly the universe as we see it and couldn't have done anything else just because that's its nature, problem solved. That's a better hypothesis.
Yeah, I'll address that. Can I just run to the restroom really quickly? I'll be back in like 30 seconds.
Sure. Hey, Frank, Converse, Quantum, how's it going? The roboting stopped, right?
Yeah, it hasn't happened for a bit.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I had there was some connection issue or something. Chat overlay. What on earth? There we go. Chat overlay. Moon Shoes is complaining
Tom,
about the what? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, would you ever go on Clubhouse and debate some stuff if that's possible? Or are you
too much of a pain.
No?
Too much of a pain to do a different app on a phone? Didn't that die too?
That's what I thought. That's what I told Converse. It was just too
Because I tried figuring out how to stream that. I needed to have a version on my computer.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I don't think that's right. So consider two hypotheses. Hypothesis one is that there's an infinitely large universe, and hypothesis two is that there's a universe that's exactly 10 quadrillion meters across. I think that even if both of those can explain the data, the theory that there's an infinite universe ends up being a lot more likely because it's less arbitrary, there aren't arbitrary limits, and it's simpler to specify. Or here's another case. So, which is more likely, that there's a God who can do everything, or that there's a God who can do everything except 5 random things? So you can't move peanuts or something, but can do everything else.
The one that can do less is more likely.
Okay, I think that's absurd, and I don't see a good I certainly don't see a good reason to accept that as the right account of simplicity. Generally, what people think is that simplicity has something to do with how long, if you wanted to fully describe the properties of the thing, how long it would take. But on that criteria, God's very simple. You just say, there's a mind without limits. Very simple to specify. That's the complete picture of fundamental reality. In contrast, for naturalism, you'll have to specify all the physical things that exist and the laws. There are these complicated mathematical functions that govern how it behaves over time. Much more complicated.
That seems stupid. That seems like you're defining simplicity based off of the ability for the human mind to express it in a sentence that the humans made up. That seems very stupid.
So it's not.
Wait. So the argument here is that, for example, if I said, I don't know, Sky Daddy, infinite mind or whatever, and compared that to, say, the laws of gravity or the laws of physics, I'd say the laws of physics are simpler, not because they're easier to express. They're very difficult to express. Using general and special relativity is very complicated math to do it, but it's simpler because it conforms to the language of reality, physics. Since it's in the language of reality, that way to express things is simpler than using English words or concepts. And so in order to try and to translate an English word or concept into a physical constant would be insanely more difficult than to use the math of general and special relativity. And so when you say the simplicity to express something, you seem to be biasing the ability for human minds to slap labels on properties and saying that counts as an expression, when I don't think it counts as an expression at all. It's not even in the correct category. In order to count as an expression of properties, Again, it'd have to be a combination of things that have an empirical basis. Otherwise, doesn't even count. It's just stuff we've made up.
Yeah. So, I think that, yeah. So I don't think that's right. It's true that the measure of simplicity is obviously not how long it takes to describe something in English. So the idea is going to be, it's about how long it would take to describe things in some like idealized language. And there are different measures of this, like Kolmogorov complexity or like Shannon complexity. Now, I'm not an expert on information theory, but that I think that roughly tracks how long it is to specify. So if you invoke only fundamental entities like a mind, and then say those things exist without limits, that would be easier to specify than some complicated set of mathematical laws. Now you note that you say, well, this can't be right because this implies that the laws of physics are super complicated because they're hard to work out.
No.
Being hard to work out is different from being complicated. Something can be very simple in its essentials, but then the things it results in are very complicated to figure out. So complexity just has to do with how long it takes to describe in some ideal language the things that exist without limits.
So my argument is more that to say that something that is easy to express is more likely to exist because it's easy to express has no logical basis. None.
Okay, so you reject the sort of widely accepted view in terms of the philosophy of having to do with simplicity. You kind of reject that view. You don't think Kolmogorov complexity and things like that.
I'm very familiar with Kolmogorov complexity, which has nothing to do with ontological claims. You can't say stuff exists because it's more Kolmogorov simplistic. It's not a thing. Literally not a thing.
Well, when evaluating theories, generally people think that a theory that has lower Kolmogorov complexity is more likely to be true, is more likely to be the right theory.
No, not really. It's just testable predictions. We don't really care. Like you could have the most Kolmogorov complexity.
Wait, no, but if there are two theories, but scientists favor the simpler theory. If there are two theories that explain the data, they'll favor the simpler theory. And in their hypothesis selection, certainly they'll favor the simpler theory, which is why, for instance, people think that if you that when making theories, you don't think that scientists favor simpler theories?
Nope.
When making, okay, well, you're just wrong.
Nope, I'm actually not wrong. This was actually a huge debate between what's his name? In physics, it was a thing between two different competing hypotheses, and then they didn't care. So like there was one that was super complicated that no one really knew how to do, and one that
no one knowing how to do has nothing to do with simplicity. If you just Google Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy,
stop talking.
Simplicity and Philosophy of Science.
So there were two ways to do Feynman's infinite direction thing. Feynman diagrams. Feynman diagrams was a way to do a certain kind of a thing, and there was a different way to do it that was significantly more complicated, and it was very hard to do, and nobody could figure it out except for like the people who created it. Either one worked. They were both fine. The one that was preferred was simpler because it was methodologically simpler. There's no ontological relevance to simplicity. Simplicity is a methodology that humans can do to how we make things easy. That's it. There's nothing there. We don't care about how complicated it is. If it makes predictions, it doesn't matter how complicated it is. String theory is like stupid complicated. It's one of the most preferred theories in physics. Multiverse, I don't, also stupid complicated, preferred in physics. Simplicity is just not a thing in physics. We don't care. We literally just don't care except for the ability to do the methodological practice of the physics and how it fits into the other physics. Simplicity in physics is how well it fits in with the other physics, not how easy it is to explain. We don't really care about that. So no, simplicity is not, we don't care. Like by your definition, simplicity is just not a thing in physics.
Okay, so everything you said there was false.
Nope.
It is not true. It is not true that string theory is simple. That string theory isn't simple. String theory, it's complicated to work out the math, certainly. But string theory is admired because it starts with these very simple strings with simple mathematical properties, and then from these hello?
Yeah.
And then from... Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought I got kicked for a sec. And then from these, you deduce a wide variety of properties that you can fall from the math. It's not about how complicated it is to figure it out. It's about the prior probability. So imagine you have two theories, right? Theory one is string theory. Theory two is string theory plus there are 1,000 leprechauns, right? Do you think that and let's say neither of them have yet made testable predictions. Which do you think is more likely?
Neither. They're both garbage.
You don't think either is more likely than the other?
Not really, no.
Okay, so would you like to make the following bet? In 30 years, if string theory is widely accepted among physicists, you pay me $50. If string theory plus there's a leprechaun is widely accepted among physicists, I'll pay you $50, if neither is more probable than the other.
Well, they're the same theory. Like string theory literally entails all logical possible worlds, including leprechauns. They're the same theory.
Well, no, it doesn't. But
Yes, it does.
but the theory
Literally,
would
it
be that
does.
at the fundamental level, there are strings and leprechauns. No, you think that is there a possible world where string theory is false?
Yes.
Okay, so string theory entails a world where string theory is false.
No. So all physically possible things, like leprechauns existing, would be a thing.
All physically possible given string theory, of course.
Okay, stop.
But that's not all.
Stop. So, like in string theory, it would entail leprechauns. Leprechauns would be a thing. There would be things with leprechauns as long as it's a physical possible result of the laws of physics. That would be a thing.
Well, but you said all logically possible worlds.
Yes, I said that.
So do you deny that?
Yes, clearly not all logically possible. It's the physically possible,
Okay,
not
cool.
non-logically possible.
All physically possible given string theory.
Yeah.
Okay. But so it wouldn't imply a world where, for example, there's magic, right? Where there are it might imply worlds where like the laws of physics turn out in various implausible ways to get things like leprechauns that maybe have a lot of gold, but it wouldn't imply. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're in agreement. So string theory is in fact very simple. But my point is that simpler theories are widely accepted to be virtuous in science. It's been observed over and over again that simpler theories are more likely. And there's a principle, and if you deny this, then you get a complete crazy skepticism and solipsism. If you deny
so my objection here isn't the word simplicity, it's your definition of simplicity. So as I said, simplicity in physics is how it corresponds to the known laws of physics, how simple it is relative to the laws of physics.
I don't know what that means.
It's because they don't use the term simplicity in the same way you do. So yours is just
okay. So how did the physicists use simplicity in deciding between simpler and more complicated theories that explain the data?
The ability to express it in physics, using physics. That's how. Like the simpler the equation.
The simpler the equation to explain the hypothesis. Okay, right. So I agree that it generally they'll favor simpler equations if they have two theories that are both say that the world's fully governed by these simple mathematical equations, they'll privilege the simpler theories. But that's because physicists are in the business of working out a theory of physics, not a theory of ultimate ontology. So my claim is that what we want is we don't just want how simple the equations are unless we start out with a priori certainty that reality is ultimately composed of math, which we shouldn't, right? Because I think there are lots of things. The
argument here is that simplicity is contingent.
To believe in as fundamental, even if we can't describe those mathematically, like the existence of consciousness. So I think it has to be that you have to allow for in your ontology the expression of things like consciousness without ballooning complexity. And then if we do that, then just saying, look, we have a mind, it's the simplest sort of mind, it's a mind without limits, that's a very good theory.
No, it's a terrible theory. That's absolutely garbage. That's literally trash. So simplicity is going to be
literally trash.
Literally trash. Like literally, you should throw
literally.
It's
a thing of trash.
Literally, yes.
It's like people throw it outside their cars.
A rotten banana.
The side of the road.
It's literally a rotten banana. Yes. So simplicity.
You're using literally to mean figuratively here.
No. I mean it's literally a rotten banana. Yeah, theism, just literally a rotten banana. Yes, literally. So for simplicity to be meaningful, it has to be relevant to the fields. That was the point of the physics thing. Physics is simple relative to physical laws. And so when you're applying simplicity to the fundamental nature of reality, your preferred definition of simplicity is no more valid than magical farting leprechaun's preferred definition of simplicity. You would need some kind of a basis to show that an unlimited mind, that definition of simplicity, is more likely to correspond to reality than my particle that just does everything that we see and nothing more. And you don't have that. No one has that. There's no connection to reality to show which definition of simplicity is the one that corresponds to reality. It just doesn't exist. It's just you're just making up a definition of simplicity that you like, that no one else likes. No one in physics agrees with that. No one in physics thinks an unlimited mind is simple. Nobody in physics thinks that. It's just the dumbest thing ever.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? No one in physics? Yeah. Like you think, for example, like for the physicist Aaron Wall or the philosopher with a PhD in physics.
That's a philosopher.
I'm totally blanking on his name.
There's
Luke Barnes. You don't think Luke Barnes thinks God is simple?
Nope.
Okay, so Well, you can listen to Luke Barnes.
talked
If you
to him.
Google Luke
I've
Barnes,
talked-
you can find
had
him
him on my
talking about
channel.
God being simple. Yeah, well, okay. That doesn't mean you're aware of everything he's ever said.
Well, no. So I
and it
talked to them
certainly doesn't
about
mean you'd
this, and like,
accurately-
if we talked about how is God a simple definition when it comes to ontology and physics? No.
Wait, sorry. You think Luke Barnes doesn't think that God is simple?
In relative to physics, no. Not like no.
Sorry. Okay, I'm happy to wait. I really want to hear the quote from Luke Barnes saying this, because when we last spoke a few years ago, you fabricated a Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy
Wait, which
page
one?
that did not exist.
Which one?
You said, let me find it. And so I think this is another one that doesn't exist. But yeah, let me find it. Oh, maybe I took down the video. Sorry, let me find it.
Hey Tom, are you good with taking questions afterwards, or do you just want to end it? Tired?
Maybe for a little
Okay,
bit, I guess.
the page you invented was criticisms of utilitarianism.
What?
There was a quote that you said was from the criticisms of utilitarianism page, and it was both not on any page remotely similar to that, and it didn't exist.
What was the criticism?
So what you said, you were
Criticism
saying that
was,
utilitarian.
Go ahead.
What you were saying was that and we don't have to get into the details here, but because I think you're not telling the truth about this one either, but we can if you want. What you said was you were saying that utilitarianism is wrong because utilitarianism suggests that it's morally good to, for example, push the guy off the bridge or flick the switch, when in fact it's justified, but it's a justified immoral action. So you were saying that any action that is, even if it produces
That's my
some good stuff,
morality.
if it has bad effects, you were saying that it's a justified immoral action.
That's my
and you
morality.
said that that was one of the major criticisms of it, and that this
What?
showed up in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy page titled Criticisms of Utilitarianism. So here's what you said, quote, "Yes, they have. It's literally one of the major criticisms. Like, just Google Stanford Encyclopedia of Criticisms of Utilitarianism.
Yes.
It's the first one. That's not a real page."
Okay, that
And I
do you not
I can link
understand
the
that
video here.
sentence? Like that sentence isn't like saying there is an actual page titled Criticisms of Utilitarianism. It's saying go to Stanford Encyclopedia and look up the criticisms of utilitarianism. Like that sentence is not hard to understand. I wasn't saying there's literally a page
Wait, let
titled that.
me listen to the audio for a sec.
Sure.
So questions?
Sure.
And also, if you look at the
So if you just
utilitarianism
Google
page,
utilitarianism criticism, first thing that pops up: critics object to utilitarianism by claiming that the theory justifies treating people unjustly, violating their rights, etc. It's literally like
yeah. Well, no, but
Google
that wasn't
criticisms.
right. But that wasn't your claim.
That is my
Anyways,
claim. That's
people
literally
can
my claim.
watch. People. No. Look, you don't have any memory of this. This was 2 years
No,
ago.
I'm going off of what you just said. So what you just said, argument
Well,
is,
there's more in the audio.
I
Look,
don't-
okay. I mean, we can I'd be happy to stream the audio, okay?
Pause,
Because I think at the audio it
pause,
becomes very clear,
pause.
and it's in
So the argument that you just said, this is an argument I make very, very often. It is that utilitarianism is wrong because in utilitarianism, you can do a very bad thing, like killing one to save five, and that's called moral via utilitarianism. And so you do something to violate rights, and that is claimed to be moral. This is the major criticism, the primary criticism against utilitarianism. That's just a fact. You just Google utilitarianism criticism. It's the major criticism against that. The quote I said, I specifically told you to look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for criticisms because it's going to be on there too, was correct.
Yeah. So here's the quote. So I asked you, where does the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy say that? And you said criticisms of utilitarianism. Go have fun.
Yes. So that's not a
Right.
page
So
claim.
that's not a real that's not a real page. And
that's not a claim of a page. So it's just telling you to go look for the criticisms of utilitarianism on the Stanford Encyclopedia. Like there's no page criticism. I don't think of anything on the Stanford Encyclopedia. It's not a thing. There is a criticism section usually at the bottom of every page for every topic. So when I said that, I was telling you to go look for the criticisms of utilitarianism. I wasn't giving you an actual page.
Yeah. Well, so okay, I would just encourage people to watch the video because it's a little bit hard for to find the exact quotes from the transcript. But if you watch the video and it's not a very long video, you can see it's very clear based on the context that you were suggesting that there was a Stanford Encyclopedia
No,
of Philosophy page that doesn't
I
exist.
literally
And the
wasn't.
point,
I
and the point,
literally
and the
wasn't.
point, and the point that you are making does not appear on the page, right? If you listen to the point that you are making,
Okay,
you weren't.
I'm muting you again because you are so stupid. Learn how to steel man an argument. What I said in that argument was to tell you to look for the criticisms of utilitarianism. I wasn't giving you a specific page to look at it because I didn't care enough about you to actually find it. It was just telling you to look at the criticisms of utilitarianism because the number one criticism, as I just Googled utilitarianism criticisms, was critics object to utilitarianism by claiming that theories justify treating people unjustly, violating their rights, etc. And then it follows and explains that this criticism only stands up if there's always wrong and thus never morally justified ways to treat people these ways, such as in the trolley problem. So that was the point. It's literally the first thing that came up. You just Google utilitarianism criticism. I was correct in everything I said in that clip, 100%. And the fact that you were unable to comprehend that wasn't literally telling you to go to a literal page that I had looked up, because I did not. I had not done any work to look up a page because I had already known this is the primary criticism of utilitarianism, means you are dumb. You don't know how to steel man a position. What I was saying there is just telling you to go look up the criticisms of utilitarianism on the Stanford Encyclopedia. I was not suggesting there was any page particular.
Can you explain then what you meant by it's the first one if you weren't referring to any page?
The primary criticism against utilitarianism. It's the first criticism.
So when you say,
so
if you say, okay, so imagine I say, you're like, what's the evidence that Lacona said? I say, look up Lacona's paper. It's the first thing there. You think what I mean is it's the first broad substantive point made by the philosophy. I mean, it's very silly, and anyone can see that it's silly if they watch the video.
Yes, because if that's probably the first one he would address too. Yes.
Okay, well, you all can watch the video. It's very clear that what TJump is saying. It's sort of like there are some interpretations of events that might sound reasonable if you haven't seen the original clip. But in this case, and I'm happy to stream the video if you would like.
I will bet money that that's exactly what I said and intended. And if you steel man it, that's exactly what I intended. So yes, that's probably.
I'll bet you $10.
Sure.
I'll bet you $10. Wait, can we bet on whether Sully at the end of this Sully will conclude? Because obviously all think that we'll both disagree.
Sully concludes. No, that one's a terrible idea.
Okay, what about Converse or something?
They can watch it. That's fine.
Because,
no, I'm not
because obviously,
leave. But so if you basic steel man, just learn how to steel man. That's so obvious what I was saying. They're so painfully obvious.
No, but if you watch the clip, it is unbelievably clear. It is unbelievably clear that is not, in fact, what you were saying. That you weren't just saying
so
an objection
obvious.
to utilitarian.
So obvious. That's exactly what I was saying. But let's get back to the topic.
So that unfortunately is not true.
Literally, that's the case. That's a fact.
I would encourage everyone.
You just are incapable of understanding that at all.
Yeah. I would encourage everyone to watch the clip, and it's very clear what you were saying. I mean, I guess we can talk more about theism if you want, or I'd be happy to make a bet on what if we watch the clip and then we ask,
we can go
some neutral third party.
Let's go to questions.
Okay, yeah, we can take questions.
All right, I'm gonna let people up.
Yeah, wait, Scully, if someone suggested Scully, you watching the clip, Scully, I'll send you the clip. And I'm willing to make bets with anyone that Scully will conclude I'm right here. Because Scully's a reasonable person.
You can post it.
Okay, yeah, but it's probably buried up in the chat. But anyways, you can find it there.
It's Sully, not Scully.
Oh, sorry. I don't know why I keep saying that. It's my bad.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure you got his name right.
I'm sorry for sullying your good name. That was a good pun. That worked on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Sullying your good name, because I was saying your name was Sully, but then.
Do you have a question?
No, it's all good, man. I don't have it written on here right now. So.
Yeah. Do any of TJump's adoring fans want to take bets on whether Mr. Scully will come to agree with me about the context? Well, no, I want to make free money here.
Bring it up with them in a private chat or something. Do we have a question from the audience?
Okay, sure. Happy to take questions.
Yeah, I have a question to Omni.
I have an answer to Omni. To a question to me.
Yeah, so can you explain to me how the God hypothesis isn't just a just so story?
Yeah. So something is a just so story if you have to invoke if the theory requires lots of ad hoc elements to explain the data, right? So it's a just so story if you like say, well, maybe there's a magic pixie, a pixie that wants me to get a royal flush. It's a bad explanation because first of all, pixies have low prior probabilities, and second, they're a poor explanation of the data. There's no reason why they'd want me to get a royal flush, and so the prior probability is either like absurdly low, and the conditional probability the conditional probability of it turning out that way is very high. The prior is low, and the conditional probability of them getting a royal flush, if there is a fairy, is very low. In the case of God, the prior that there's a God is not very low. It explains lots of otherwise surprising facts, and the conditional probability of those facts obtaining, if there is a God, is not high. So in other words, just the things that make the theistic hypothesis a good hypothesis make it neither arbitrary nor ad hoc.
Yeah, so problem here is I take it that a just so story is a hypothesis that doesn't have any independent motivations. So what are the independent motivations for the God hypothesis?
So I don't know if that is the right definition of a just so story, because a theory can be reasonable to believe even if it doesn't have any independent motivations. So for instance, if that one motivation is strong enough. So like, let's see, what's a good example?
I don't know what you mean by strong. Look,
like it makes
what I mean by independent motivation is a reason to believe it that isn't just what it's explaining, right? So.
Oh, well, I think the reason to believe any hypothesis is just the prior plus what it explains. So like the reason to believe that Julius Caesar existed is just the prior isn't that low, and then it explains otherwise very surprising facts about the world. Like the fact that people were constantly writing about him and making gold coins about him, and the fact that the things about his conquest seem to match the history provided by other examples. So for that reason, I don't think if that's what you mean by a just so story, then I don't think there's anything wrong with a just so story. Like I think then a just so story is completely unobjectionable.
Yeah, I don't understand. Then what would be the objection to other similar God of the gaps style hypothesis? Like for instance, if I have shoes, right, and I see that my shoes aren't there, that's evidence for shoe stealing theories, right?
Yeah, but the idea is that the shoe stealing theory just has a really low prior.
So me not seeing the shoes is evidence for shoe stealing theories, right? And it explains, and there being shoe stealing theories explains the evidence, right? So there has to be some other reason to believe in shoe stealing theories,
Right.
other than the fact that it explains the evidence. So that's why I'm asking you, what are the independent motivations for the God hypothesis?
Okay, so so I disagree with your. I don't think there's anything objectionable about a just so story as you've defined it. Now you might think so. Your argument for it seemed to be, well, then how else do we rule out the shoe stealing fairies? And I would say that we rule out the shoe stealing fairies by the low prior probability, right? So what you do is you just plug in the prior and then multiply it by the conditional probability. So what's the prior of a shoe stealing fairy? Well, it's the prior probability of a fairy, very low, times the probability that if there's a fairy, it would steal your shoes. How would it do that? There are lots of things that a fairy might do. There's nothing particularly valuable about stealing shoes or nothing that makes fairies especially likely to do that. Right? So even when you get the boost from the fact that it explains why your shoes are gone, it just has such a low prior probability that it's an absurd hypothesis to believe that you should never think that you should think it's absurdly unlikely to be right. So it just comes down to probabilities. In contrast with God, we have this very simple and parsimonious hypothesis, much simpler than naturalism, that says there's just a single unlimited mind. And then it explains tons and tons of facts about the world. It explained the 8 facts I've given before. It explains moral knowledge. It explains the anthropic data, which I don't have time to go into, but if people want to see, they can Google the best argument for God on my blog at benthams.substack.com, which you should all check out, or you could find if you Google Bentham's Bulldog. I also have a Discord server that I just linked. So yeah, I just think if a theory doesn't have a low prior and explains enough stuff, then it's reasonable to believe.
Well, first of all, I think it's hilarious that you have a blog named after a dead philosopher. Like that'd be like if I named my blog Wittgenstein's Walrus. But
It's a
I
good
just
name.
think
I
that
like it. It's funny. Yeah. Props to Omni. It's a good name.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
yeah,
So I think we
but
should. I think you should direct the Wittgenstein questions to TJump because I've heard he's a real expert on Wittgenstein.
yeah. So I guess my problem is that I'm not really understanding what is meant by something by a prior probability being low. If it's not just some reason not to believe it, that's not motive. There's
Why
if
is
you're
the
saying
prior
the prior
probability of a magic leprechaun low, but the prior probability of a magic sky daddy is not low?
Well, I don't think he's a sky daddy. He's neither my father nor located in the sky. But I'll take that as just a term of abuse to refer to God. And so, okay, does God not have a low prior? Because God is very simple. You can exhaustively describe God by invoking just one fundamental property without limits. That makes something simple. That's why modal realism is simple. That's why if there was just one core physical property and you thought that was instantiated without limit, that would be very simple. If a theory lacks arbitrary limits and is simple to describe, then it's a very simple theory. And so that's why theism is a simple theory. But in order to describe the magic pixie, you'd have to bake, given that it obviously won't follow from our laws of physics, you'd have to bake in these new laws that give rise to it, these new magic laws that are not at all simple.
What if I just said it's a perfectly simple magic farting pixie? Problem solved. Victory. Equivalent hypotheses. Game over, man.
Just asserting that something is simple, it doesn't make it simple. It has to be plausible that you can derive its properties from some simple property. So in the case of God, you can derive its properties from a simple property by saying God is an unlimited mind. And then you say, look, it would be a limit on a mind if it didn't know stuff or if it was limited in what it could do. So God can do and knows everything, or you can say he's an unlimited agent. And then you give the analysis that if you understand that something's morally right and you have no contrary motivations, then you'll be somewhat motivated to pursue it. And then if that's right, then you can derive all of God's properties. Just asserting that something is simple, that doesn't make it simple.
So what it sounds like to me is that you're saying that the independent motivation is that the God hypothesis is simple, it's parsimonious, something along those lines.
So number one, it's simple and parsimonious. And number two, it explains a lot more data. So sometimes it's reasonable to believe hypotheses that have really low priors just because they render the facts way more probable. So for instance, suppose you give me your phone number, right? The prior probability of that being your phone number is about 1 in 10 to the 9th, right? Because there are 9 numbers, the probability of each digit was 1 in 10. But it's reasonable to believe it on the basis of your testimony because the probability that you would say that number is much higher if that's actually your phone number than if it's not. So it often is reasonable to believe things with a low prior on the basis of very strong evidence.
Yeah, I just asked you a yes or no question. So the independent motivation is that it's parsimonious, right?
Yes.
No, that's not the only independent motivation. There are two independent motivations.
I didn't ask you if it was the only. I said it is an
Well, you said
independent
the
motivation.
independent motivation. So that's ambiguous between that's the only one or there are multiple. So
Okay, okay.
certainly
Principle of
independent
charity.
motivation.
He's just referring to your primary argument so far presented in this debate. Your primary argument.
Well, I think the statement was a little bit unclear, and I'm worried that we'd get off on the wrong foot. But so the two reasons are it's simple and it explains lots more stuff than just.
Wait. But I'm defining an independent motivation as a motivation that's not about explaining. That's not about explanation.
Okay,
It's
so then
something. It's a reason to believe something. It's not motivated by what it's trying to explain, right? So you said it's because it explains more things, and that.
Sorry. So what precisely is the question? Or sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So you said something like it's parsimonious, and that it explains more stuff. Those are basically the motivations you said, right?
The motivations for what?
He's asking about belief in God.
God.
For believing in God, the two main reasons you gave are one, it explains the data, and two, it's simple. Those are the two primary.
I think yes. The prior isn't too low, and it explains the data well.
Right. He's asking about what is the core feature of what makes God justifiable as opposed to other hypotheses, and your argument is simplicity. Simplicity is what makes God different than all of the other.
My arguments are twofold. One, simplicity, and the other is that it explains more stuff. Right. So for the shoe stealing pixie one, that only explains why the shoes left my room, which doesn't have a super low prior. But in the case of God, it explains lots of different things. I've given the 10 facts that it explains nicely.
Right. So just if we can make up infinitely many hypotheses that can explain all of the data, and you're saying the difference is yours is simpler. That's the core argument.
Right. So if you have some other hypothesis that predicts all the data, then the difference, right, is that it's much simpler. Because for the other ones, you have to say there's a shoe stealing. Like, suppose you used a pixie to explain the facts I use God to explain. Well, you'd have to build in that the pixie is interested in like a physical universe and laws and applicable laws. While with God, you can just say there's a perfect being, and then that makes it reasonably likely that the other stuff would happen. So for another hypothesis to explain the data, it has to be absurdly low in terms of prior probability.
Yeah, so
maybe we should move on to a different question at some point, because I think maybe there are more people that want questions.
I was about to say the same thing, and someone had already told me that. That's fine.
Yeah,
I'll just say one last thing and then I'll go. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so I don't understand, and Omni can respond if he wants to, but I'm not understanding how you're saying it's parsimonious, considering that I take parsimony to be ontological, and if the non-God world posits less entities, i.e., it's a world sans God, right? Then it seems to me that the non-God hypothesis would posit less entities. So I'm not really seeing what you mean by simplicity.
I don't think that's the right way of thinking about simplicity. Simplicity isn't about the total number of entities, but the number of unexplained entities, and more specifically, the how simple it is to describe the entities that exist without explanation. Right. So consider two hypotheses. So if you accepted your definition of simplicity, then you should just be a solipsist, because the only thing you're directly aware of is your consciousness, and then you would believe that there's nothing else that exists. But that's not a good way of going, because solipsism it builds your consciousness into the fundamental level, which means that the fundamental thing is very complicated. Okay, so solipsism, not a good explanation, because simplicity is about the fundamental things. I only believe in one fundamental thing, named God. And, I think that's very simple. Doesn't have any parts to it. Isn't composed, isn't complex, doesn't have parts arranged in a complicated way, is simple to describe. So I think God is a very simple hypothesis. While the comparable naturalistic hypothesis is way more complicated.
Yeah. I'll think about that more now. Yeah, I'm just gonna go. That's okay. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking him.
We appreciate it. Hey, if anyone else wants to come up, I know Daniel Nero was here, but I guess he left. If anyone else wants to come up, raise your hand, and if not, then we'll wrap it up. All right. I guess we don't have any more questions. Yeah, you guys. Yeah, Omni, thanks for coming. I appreciate it, man. And Tom, whatever you want to do now, that's up to you, brother.
Cool. I'm gonna go take a nap. I gotta wake up at like 6 a.m.
Yeah, thanks for doing the debate. Thanks for hosting. Thanks for debating, Tom. Yeah.